Sirens tore through the afternoon air, sharp and sudden, cutting across a busy American street where traffic slowed and heads turned. A black luxury sedan rolled to the curb. Red and blue lights exploded behind it. "Turn off the engine. Hands where I can see them." The shout came before the driver could even open his door. Inside the car sat a well-dressed black man in his mid-40s. Calm. Composed. Both hands lifted slowly onto the steering wheel. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. A woman froze mid-step. Someone raised a phone. The officer stormed forward, hand hovering near his holster, eyes locked like he'd already made up his mind. "Step out of the vehicle," he barked. "This car's been reported stolen." The man blinked once. No panic. No protest. Just a quiet breath. "Officer," he said evenly, "there's been a mistake." The cop scoffed. "That's what you all say." Traffic backed up. Horns blared. More phones came out. The tension thickened as the officer circled the car, peering inside like he was hunting for proof. The man didn't raise his voice. Didn't argue. He simply looked straight ahead and said one sentence that made nearby bystanders exchange uneasy glances. "Please be very careful about what you do next." The officer laughed. What he didn't know, what no one on that street knew, was that in just a few minutes, this stop would turn into a public reckoning, and his badge would suddenly feel very heavy. The man behind the wheel hadn't planned for any of this. His day had started like countless others, early morning light pouring through his kitchen window, the quiet hum of a coffee maker, a neatly pressed suit laid out with care. He moved with routine and discipline, the kind that comes from years of responsibility. Nothing flashy. Nothing careless. Just precision. Inside the trunk of the sedan were neatly stacked legal folders, highlighted pages peeking out from thick binders. A leather briefcase rested on the passenger seat, buckled in like a silent companion. The car itself wasn't new, but it was immaculate, clean lines, no dents, registered and insured down to the last digit. Every document was exactly where it was supposed to be. He had an appointment that afternoon. An important one. Not the kind you miss. Not the kind you arrive late to. As the officer continued barking commands outside, the man kept his hand steady on the steering wheel. He'd learned long ago that calm wasn't weakness, it was control. His breathing stayed slow, measured. In his mind, he replayed a familiar rule: follow procedure. Give them nothing they can twist. He'd seen situations like this before. Not personally, but closely enough to know how quickly they could spiral. One wrong word. One sudden movement. One assumption made by the wrong person at the wrong moment. Do exactly what they ask, he reminded himself silently. And nothing more. The officer demanded identification. He reached for his wallet slowly, narrating each movement, careful not to startle. The card left his fingers and disappeared into the officer's hand. No reaction. No apology. Just suspicion. Around them, the street transformed into a stage. Pedestrians slowed. Drivers craned their necks. Phones rose into the air, lenses locked on the unfolding moment. He felt the weight of their stares, not sympathy, not anger, just curiosity. Judgment waiting to form. Still, he didn't explain himself. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't defend his status, his education, or the years he'd spent believing in the very system now pressing against him. Because he knew something most people didn't. In moments like these, the truth doesn't rush in shouting. It waits. And when it finally arrives, it changes everything. The calm didn't last. A second patrol car screeched to a stop behind the first, tires scraping the curb. Its doors flew open, and another officer stepped out, bigger, louder, already irritated. He took one look at the scene and made up his mind before hearing a single word. "What's the problem?" he asked. "Stolen vehicle," the first cop replied. "Drivers being difficult." The man heard that word, difficult, and felt the air shift. He stayed quiet as the second officer approached, eyes sweeping over him like an accusation. The officer leaned down, peering through the open window. "Where'd you get this car?" he demanded. "Don't lie." "I purchased it legally," the man answered calmly. The officer laughed, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Sure you did." A few people on the sidewalk exchanged glances. Phones were fully raised now, recording from every angle. A woman whispered to her friend. A delivery driver stopped mid-route. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore, it was becoming a spectacle. "Step out of the vehicle." "Now," the second officer ordered. The man complied, moving slowly, deliberately. As he stood on the pavement, the first officer began circling him, eyes narrowing at the tailored suit, the polished shoes. "Nice outfit," the cop said. "Doesn't match the story." The comment landed like a slap. Not loud. Not violent. But sharp. "Hands behind your back," the officer added. The man hesitated for half a second, not in defiance, but in disbelief, then obeyed. Cold hands pressed against his wrists. Not cuffs yet. But the message was clear. "Any weapons?" the second officer asked. "No," he replied. They searched him anyway. Patting down his pockets. Tugging at his jacket. One officer pulled the lapel aside as if hoping something illegal would fall out. Dust from the curb brushed against the fabric of his suit. "Hey," a voice from the crowd called out, "he's not doing anything." The first officer snapped his head around. "Back up. This doesn't concern you." A veteran-looking man stepped forward slightly, hands raised. "Just saying, you don't gotta treat him like that." The officer moved closer, chest puffed. "I said step back. Now." The crowd fell silent again. The man on the curb stared straight ahead, jaw tight. This wasn't fear. It was restraint. He could feel the humiliation setting in, not because of the officers, but because of the eyes. The phones. The story already being written without facts. One officer reached for the car door. "Please don't touch my vehicle," the man said evenly. That did it. "Don't tell me what to do," the cop snapped, hand dropping toward his taser. "You want to make this harder on yourself?" The word harder hung in the air. A police radio crackled. "Unit 12, status?" The first officer keyed the mic. "Possible stolen vehicle. Suspect is uncooperative." The man closed his eyes briefly. Uncooperative. For standing still. For speaking calmly. For existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He opened his eyes, turned his head slightly, and said, firm, controlled, and loud enough to be heard. "Officer, I am asking you, one time, to verify my name before this goes any further." The officers ignored him. And the crowd leaned in, sensing that whatever was coming next wouldn't be small. The moment stretched longer than it should have. The officers didn't respond to his request. They didn't acknowledge it at all. Instead, the first cop tightened his jaw and nodded to his partner, a silent agreement passing between them, an unspoken decision that whatever this man was asking for, he wasn't going to get it. "Turn around," the officer ordered. The man complied. Slowly. Carefully. Every movement deliberate, like he was walking through a room full of broken glass. His polished shoes scuffed against the pavement as he was positioned facing the patrol car. The heat from the engine radiated against his knees. "Spread your feet." He did. Hands pressed hard against his back as the pat-down began again, rougher this time. Not searching. Testing. The officer lingered longer than necessary, tugging at seams, squeezing pockets already checked. "You sure you don't have anything on you?" the cop muttered. "Because this would be a bad time to lie." "I've answered your question," the man replied evenly. That calm tone irritated them more than shouting ever could. "What was that?" the second officer snapped. "You got an attitude now?" "No," the man said. "I have rights." The words hit like gasoline on a spark. The first officer stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening. "Right now, you have exactly what I say you have." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few people shook their heads. Someone whispered, "This is messed up." Phones zoomed in tighter, capturing faces, badges, the quiet dignity of the man being pushed back against metal and authority. The officer reached into the man's jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open without asking. Card slid halfway out. "See," the cop said loudly. "All dressed up, fancy car, no explanation." "That's my identification," the man said, his voice firmer now. "You're required to read it." The officer glanced down at the card, and then, strangely, looked away. Instead of responding, he shut the wallet and shoved it back into the man's pocket. The crowd noticed that. "Why won't he look at it?" someone whispered. "Because he already decided," another voice answered. The man swallowed, not out of fear, but frustration. He had spent his entire adult life believing that procedures existed for moments like this. That the law, imperfect as it was, still had rails, still required steps. Verification. De-escalation. Accountability. But here, on this sidewalk, procedure had been replaced by pride. "Sit down," the officer ordered. "For what reason?" the man asked. The cop leaned in close enough that the man could smell coffee and impatience on his breath. "Because I told you to." He lowered himself onto the curb. The suit trousers creased sharply as he sat, the fabric brushing against grime. Cameras captured the moment instantly, him seated low, officers standing tall above him. It looked like guilt. It felt like humiliation. A police radio crackled again. Another unit asked for clarification. The first officer responded with clipped words, his tone confident, rehearsed. Driver refusing to cooperate. Claiming ownership without proof. The man closed his eyes briefly. Refusing. Claiming. Without proof. Every word was wrong. And every word was being broadcast. A woman from across the street spoke up, her voice shaking. "He's been calm this whole time." The second officer spun around. "Ma'am, step back. You don't know the situation." "I'm watching it," she replied. "That's enough," the officer shouted, stepping toward the crowd. "Back up or I'll start issuing citations." People retreated, not because they agreed, but because they knew better. Because they'd seen what happened when voices rose against uniforms. The man on the curb remained still. His hands rested open on his knees. He stared at the pavement, not defeated, but focused. Waiting. Inside his mind, thoughts moved quickly but quietly. He knew exactly how this would look on camera. How silence could be mistaken for submission. How restraint could be framed as guilt. But he also knew something else. There was a line. And they were crossing it. "Last chance," the first officer said, stepping back into view. "Tell us where you got the car." The man lifted his head slowly and met the officer's eyes for the first time. "I have already answered that," he said. "And I am again requesting that you verify my name and registration. If you continue without doing so, you are violating protocol." The officer laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. "Listen to this guy," he said to his partner. "Thinks he knows the rules." The crowd bristled. A man in a work uniform called out, "Maybe because he does." The officer snapped his head around. "I said back up." The radio crackled again. This time, a supervisor's voice cut through, asking for a status update, sharper than before. The officer hesitated. Just for a second. That hesitation didn't go unnoticed. The man saw it. The crowd felt it. Even the officer's partner shifted his weight, suddenly less certain. "Officer," the man said quietly, not to challenge, but to anchor the moment, "this situation can still be corrected. But only if you stop and verify who you're dealing with." Silence followed. No shouting. No movement. Just the hum of traffic, the buzz of phones recording, and the faint crackle of a radio waiting to be answered. The officer finally lifted the microphone. And for the first time since the sirens began, his voice lacked confidence. "Dispatch," he said, "run the name again." The crowd leaned forward. Because everyone could feel it now. The truth wasn't coming with noise. It was coming with a pause. The radio crackled softly in the officer's hand. "Dispatch," he repeated, slower this time, "run the name again." There was a pause. Not the usual half-second delay. This one stretched. Long enough for the traffic noise to creep back in. Long enough for the crowd to sense that something behind the scenes had just shifted. "Copy," the dispatcher finally replied. Her voice sounded different now, measured, careful. "Stand by." The officer lowered the radio, pretending not to notice the sudden attention. His partner glanced at him, eyebrows raised. The man on the curb stayed still. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply waited, eyes forward, hands resting calmly on his knees. This wasn't hope on his face. It was certainty. The dispatcher came back on. "Unit 12, confirm spelling." The officer frowned. "It spelled exactly how I gave it." Another pause. The crowd leaned closer without realizing it. Phones zoomed in tighter. Someone whispered, "Why is it taking so long?" The dispatcher cleared her throat. "Unit 12, can you repeat the full name one more time?" The officer hesitated, irritation creeping back into his voice as he repeated it, first name, last name, middle initial. He rolled his eyes while doing it, like the whole thing was a waste of time. The response came almost immediately this time. "Unit 12, stand by for supervisor." The officer froze. His partner turned sharply. "Supervisor? For what?" The radio crackled again before anyone could answer. "Unit 12, the dispatcher said, now unmistakably serious, you need to step away from the individual and wait where you are." The crowd reacted instantly. Murmurs broke out. A woman gasped. Someone said, "Oh, something's wrong." The officer tightened his grip on the radio. "Dispatch, explain." Another voice cut in, deeper, authoritative. "This is Sergeant Miller. Do not proceed further. I'm en route." The officer's face drained of color. "What's going on?" his partner whispered. The sergeant didn't answer that. Instead, he asked a question that landed like a hammer. "Unit 12, are you aware who you currently have detained?" Silence. The officer swallowed. "We have a possible stolen vehicle suspect." There was a brief, chilling pause. "No," the sergeant said. "You do not." The radio crackled again, louder now, as if the whole street could hear it. "You have detained a sitting high court judge." The words didn't register all at once. They rippled. Through the officer's body. Through his partner's posture. Through the crowd standing just feet away. "What?" someone whispered. The officer's mouth opened slightly. Closed. Opened again. "That's not," he started, then stopped himself. The sergeant continued, every word deliberate. "Judge presiding within this jurisdiction. Verified identification. Vehicle registered and cleared." The officer's hand began to shake. His partner took a step back without realizing it. The man on the curb finally stood, slowly, calmly, without being told. No one stopped him. No one dared. "I asked you to verify my name," he said quietly. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just factual. The crowd erupted. "Oh my God. That's a judge. They treated him like that?" Phones swung wildly now, capturing everything. Faces. Reactions. The sudden collapse of authority. The officer tried to speak. "Sir, there must be some kind of—" "Step back," the sergeant's voice snapped through the radio. "Now." The officer obeyed. For the first time since the stop began, the power dynamic flipped completely. The badge that had felt so heavy minutes ago now looked fragile. Exposed. A black SUV pulled up fast. Another patrol car. Then another. Doors opened, but no one shouted. No one reached for a weapon. The sergeant stepped out, eyes scanning the scene, then locking onto the man in the suit. "Judge," he said, nodding respectfully. The man nodded back once. Behind them, the original officer stood frozen, staring at the ground. The same sidewalk that had held his confidence now seemed to swallow it. The sergeant turned to him. "Remove yourself from this scene." "But sir." "Now." The officer backed away, the crowd parting as if instinctively making space. Whispers followed him like shadows. The judge adjusted his jacket, brushing invisible dust from the sleeve. He looked around, not at the officers, but at the people watching. "This," he said calmly, "is why procedure matters. No shouting. No threats. No revenge. Just truth, spoken softly." And in that moment, everyone there understood something powerful. The stop hadn't ended because the man was calm. It hadn't ended because the crowd filmed. It ended because the law had finally recognized itself. The street felt different now. What had once been loud and chaotic had dropped into an uneasy quiet, like the moment after thunder when everyone waits to see what comes next. Cars idled. Phones stayed raised, but no one spoke. Every eye followed the sergeant as he stepped fully into the space where the officers had stood moments earlier. He turned first to the judge. "Sir," he said, voice steady but respectful, "on behalf of this department, I apologize for what has occurred." The words landed hard. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were undeniable. The judge listened without interrupting, hands calmly folded in front of him. His expression didn't change. No satisfaction. No anger. Just composure. "You were detained without cause," the sergeant continued. "Your vehicle was cleared. Your identification was valid. This stop should have ended minutes ago." The crowd absorbed every word. People exchanged looks. Some nodded. Others clenched their jaws, the reality sinking in. Behind the sergeant, the two original officers stood apart from each other now, no longer a united front. The first officer kept his head down, jaw tight, fists clenched. His partner stared straight ahead, face blank, as if hoping to disappear into the background. The sergeant turned to them. "Remove the restraints," he ordered. There were none, but the command still mattered. It was symbolic. A line being redrawn in public. "Yes, sir," one of them muttered. The judge spoke then. Not loudly. Not angrily. But with a clarity that cut through everything. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about what happens when procedure is replaced by assumption." A woman in the crowd let out a quiet ah-hum. The judge continued, eyes moving briefly toward the cameras. "Every person on this street deserves the same respect I'm receiving now. Not because of my title, but because of the law." The words hit harder than any shouting match could have. The sergeant nodded. "Understood." He turned back to the officers. "Both of you are relieved from duty pending review. Body camera footage will be secured immediately." The first officer's head snapped up. "Sir?" "Badge and weapon," the sergeant said firmly. The officer hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then reached up and unclipped his badge. The metallic sound echoed as it dropped into the sergeant's open hand. His weapon followed. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Phones captured it all. The moment the power shifted so completely it couldn't be denied. The judge didn't look at the badge. He didn't look at the officer. He simply turned slightly, checking the time on his watch. "I have a court session to attend," he said calmly. "I trust this will be handled appropriately." "Yes, sir," the sergeant replied. Another patrol car door opened. An officer jogged over, whispering something to the sergeant, who nodded without breaking focus. The original officer stood there now, no badge, no authority, just a man in uniform, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. The crowd began to speak again, voices low but charged. That could have been anyone. They would have arrested him. They were ready to hurt him. The judge picked up his briefcase from the curb and dusted it off. He paused for a moment, then turned toward the people filming. "Keep those videos," he said. "They matter." With that, he walked back to his car. No escort. No spectacle. Just steady footsteps and quiet resolve. As the engine started, the judge glanced once in the rearview mirror. The officers. The crowd. The street that had tried to swallow him. Then he pulled away. Behind him, the sergeant addressed the remaining officers, his voice low but firm. The street slowly returned to motion, but something had shifted permanently. Because that day, in full public view, power didn't just change hands. It was exposed. And everyone watching would remember exactly how it looked when authority met accountability, and lost. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but nothing felt the same. Horns honked, pedestrians moved again, yet the memory of what had just unfolded lingered like smoke in the air. Phones continued to record, capturing every second for those who would share it, discuss it, and never forget it. The officers involved were taken aside immediately. An internal investigation was launched. Body camera footage was reviewed. Supervisors and legal advisors pored over every word, every movement, every decision. Consequences were inevitable. The original officer would be placed on administrative leave, the partner would undergo retraining. Both faced potential disciplinary action. Accountability, once delayed, was now in motion. Meanwhile, the judge drove quietly away, back to his duties, his composure unshaken. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His presence, calm yet commanding, had already made the point. Justice doesn't always shout. It doesn't always demand spectacle. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, through procedure and the truth. And when it does, it leaves an impression far deeper than anger or fear ever could. On the sidewalk, the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. People discussed what they had witnessed, shocked at how close the line between abuse of power and lawful conduct had been crossed. Some were grateful. Others angry. But everyone left with one undeniable realization: no matter the uniform, no matter the authority, accountability exists, and it matters. By the end of the day, news outlets picked up the story. Videos went viral. Public outrage demanded answers. Internal reviews became public knowledge. And across the city, conversations sparked about law, respect, and the balance of power in society. For the judge, it was just another day, but for everyone else, it was a lesson in dignity, patience, and the quiet strength of the law. That afternoon, justice had been served, not with violence, not with anger, but with the simple, unshakable weight of truth. That day, justice didn't shout. It simply stood still and spoke.